You mentioned the President's Truth Social. Is the U.S. military considering military options for Iran?
I don't want to get out in front of the President or the Secretary, but clearly, I mean, I think the President's Truth Social was pretty clear, and I think the meaning is right there for everybody. I think everybody understands what he means. I don't want to get out in front of the President, but all options are on the table at this time.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the opportunity to provide you a brief operational update on our operations against the Houthis. On Saturday, the 15th of March, shortly after 1 p.m. Eastern Time, at the direction of the President, U.S. Central Command began precision strike operations against the Houthis to restore freedom of navigation and American deterrence. The initial wave of strikes hit over 30 targets at multiple locations, degrading a variety of Houthi capabilities. These included terrorist training sites, unmanned aerial vehicle infrastructure, weapons manufacturing capabilities, and weapons storage facilities. It also included a number of command and control centers, including a terrorist compound where we know several senior Houthi unmanned aerial vehicle experts were located. On Sunday, strike operations continued against additional headquarters locations, weapons storage facilities, as well as detection capabilities that have been used to threaten maritime shipping in the past. Today, the operation continues, and it will continue in the coming days until we achieve the President's objectives. Thanks, and I look forward to your questions.
And with that, in this very crowded briefing room, I'll take some of your questions. And the first, I'll go to Logan from Newsmax.
Sean, thank you for taking my question. This really is for both of you. A question about the Bashad, that's Iran's spy ship that has been directing the Houthis throughout this conflict. Is it still operating in support of the Houthis? If so, do you know where it is?
General, turn it over to you to address that.
Sure. We know that the Iranians have provided a variety of assistance to the Houthis over the years, including some suspected intelligence. We do know that some had previously come from the Bashad. The Bashad is not currently being used for those operations, but we do know that other vessels are contemplated for those sorts of operations, so we're watching very closely to see if they return to the AO.
I would also say that, when you look at how the previous administration conducted business with Iran, they really empowered Iran to fund and export terror all around the world, whether it's with Hezbollah, Hamas, specifically with the Houthis. I mean, it's very clear. I think President Trump has made it very clear that he's put Iran on notice. I mean, I'm sure that you saw his tweet today that essentially saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that any shot fired at U.S. forces by the Houthis would be considered a shot from Iran. And this is the president showcasing leadership from the Oval Office. And frankly, bringing moral clarity back to the United States of America. We know who the enemies of this country are and the enemies of a free world are. And President Trump has put them on notice, as you saw with Iran this morning.
Sean, if the Iranian ships are operational, start helping the Houthis, will they be targeted? And for the general, any sense of number of military casualties so far and any civilian casualties in Yemen?
Well, that's a great question, General. If you'll permit me to answer.
Sure, go ahead.
So I think that I certainly don't want to get out in front of the commander-in-chief and the secretary as it pertains to clearance of strikes and who will be targeted. But I think the president's made very clear that all options are on the table.
Yeah, Tom, just on your question of casualties, military casualties, we have some initial estimates. I hesitate to say what they are because they're very much estimates at this point, but I think in terms of dozens might be a safe overall characterization.
Dozens of military?
Yeah, dozens of military casualties so far, but I really can't characterize it much better than that at this point. We'll learn more as we go. On the civilian casualty side, no indications of any civilian casualties. We, of course, have seen some of the accusations by the Houthis. We look at those closely when they do come in, but we have no credible indications of any civilian casualties.
And I'd like to add to what General Grinch said. Anytime you're close to an operation like this, having been, in combat front towards enemy before, the fog of war is a real thing. So before we announce something here from the podium, we're going to make sure that we get it right. And I think part of that is just taking the time to evaluate and doing a proper battle damage, BDA battle damage assessment, sensitive site exploitation. And frankly, that stuff just takes time. And so before we make any sort of those announcements, we're going to do a real hard look and make sure that we get it right before we announce it to you.
Yes, thanks so much for doing that, Sean. Two questions. After U.S. strikes against the Houthis on Saturday, the Houthis fired drones and missiles at the Truman. Will there be a response to those attacks? And secondly, the Pentagon has deployed the USS Gravely. Can you tell us a little bit about what it will be doing there, exactly what its mission will be?
So I guess I'll address the first part of your question first, Christina, and General, I'll let you chime in. The question of the Houthis. I mean, what was? Remind me what the first part of your question was, Christina.
Will there be a response to the Houthi attacks on the Truman?
It was that I got you. So first of all, we did get reports of the Houthis firing ballistic missiles and some one-way attack drones against U.S. forces in the region. Those attacks were largely ineffective and didn't come anywhere near U.S. forces in the region. Again, the commanders in command of those vessels were, they were completely on point with regards to defending. They were not effective attacks. And so I would also say the second part, the answer to the second part of that question is that the response is ongoing. I mean, this isn't, there's going to be, as I mentioned, a very clear end state to this. And I think a lot of that has to do with how the Houthis respond. Firing at U.S. military personnel in the region and shooting at our ships and shooting at our drones and putting American lives at risk is not a good way to end this conflict. The Houthis could stop this tomorrow if they said, we're going to stop shooting at your people. But they've clearly chosen not to do that. And so this campaign will be relentless to degrade their capability and to open up shipping lanes in the region and to defend our homeland. But generally,
thanks, Sean. The only thing I would add is, the Houthis claim to have tried to attack the Harry S. Truman. Quite frankly, it's hard to tell because while we're executing precision strikes, they missed by over 100 miles. So I would just tell you their effectiveness, I would question anything that they claim in the press that they're doing or not doing. It's very hard to tell what they are just based on their level of incompetence that they've demonstrated so far.
Thank you very much. Will this operation include sending ground troops into Yemen? If so, how do you achieve your objective of making them say enough without sending ground troops?
Well, I'll tell you, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for us to talk about force posture from this podium because as a commander who's been on the battlefield, it's very, very important to keep the enemy guessing, keep your adversaries guessing. Now, that's not to say that we've got ground troops in Yemen. That's not to say that we're sending ground troops in, but it's difficult to talk about that stuff for operational security reasons from the podium. But generally, you have anything to add?
No, nothing to add to that. Okay. I think that's exactly right.
Sean, can I follow up on that? You said that one of the things that you were waiting to do for the BDA was sensitive site exploitation. Does that include U.S. boots on the ground or any kind of American personnel on the ground to do that?
I can't talk about that stuff from the podium, but we have ways of conducting sensitive site exploitations without ground troops on the ground.
Yeah, it does not always require boots on the ground, and I'll just leave it at that.
So, can I also ask you about if there's any U.S. military assessment? I know that you're still on, the BDA is ongoing, but is there any military assessment about how much of the Houthis' capabilities were degraded by these first couple of rounds? And can you say anything? The President's Truth Social mentioned going after leaders, which seems to be one of the things that's different here. Can you say anything about any of the leaders that were targeted here?
Yeah, on the second part of the question, I'll just go to my opening statement where I mentioned that there was a unmanned aerial vehicle facility that was struck with several key leaders. Those were key individuals who led their unmanned aerial vehicle enterprise and were some of the technical experts in there. So think those types of individuals that we might be targeting as part of the command and control.